Okay, it being 12 o'clock, I'm going to call the Livability Committee meeting to order. Welcome. We're going to go around the room and we've got a small group up here today. So if we can say a name, agency we're representing, and something you're curious about coming in to today. So Christine, can we start on your side?
I'm Christine Sylvester, City of Coos Bay. And what was I?
Something you're curious about today.
Something
into the
I'm
meeting.
curious about today, if there will be a consensus about what to move forward to council.
Great, thanks, Christine.
Scott Cooper, Alternative Youth Activities. And I am curious about, we have such a wide berth on what we're going to do, how we're going to actually hone in so we can get something done.
Darren Coleman, Coos Bay Police Department, the Community Resource Officer. I just kind of echo what Scott says there.
Nicole Rutherford, City of Coos Bay, City Manager. I would echo, but I think even just like bigger, like it feels like we're kind of skirting around some things. Focus. I'm ready for focus. And we've had a version of this committee with the homeless response homeless work group. And there was a lot of things. So what are we moving forward for council? So
Sarah Stevens, Coos Bay City Council, and just apologies for my lack of attendance at this meeting in the past. It tends to fall on a hard day of the month for me, but happy to be here today. And yeah, I'm curious about how we can get to action today and bring something forward for the council to move on.
I'm Stacy Dewater. In my day job, I work for Star of Hope. I am interested to have new items to work on in the future that I have more expertise in.
Or Chabot, the Coos Bay Downtown Association, and I'll echo what I've just heard. I'd like to move this agenda item on so we can get to some other business, because this is taking up an awful lot of our time and there's an awful lot of other things I would like to get on the table.
Hi, my name's Laura Ursig. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Southern Oregon Coast Pride. I have so many things I'm curious about, like why can't we sit in a circle? It feels weird to be behind these desks. Asking definitions of like how important are the definitions in this document versus just making a decision about the number of campsites and who are we centering this for?
My name is Ryan Tuss, a community member. I'm also affiliated with the Front Street Community Bike Works. And I am most curious today about why bikes are being hidden from the street view, why that's important in the camping ordinance.
And Jim, I see we have you online. Do you want to introduce yourself? You might be muted, but we have Jim, who is representing the Community Coalition of Empire. Thanks for being here. And do we have any other Livability Committee members online? I don't think so. Okay. All right. So our discussion item today is the continued discussion and recommendation to Coos Bay City Council regarding potential amendments to Coos Bay Municipal Code as allowed by House Bill 2006. In your meeting packet, there are the camping regulations with the edits that have been discussed in this meeting. The temporary camping program and the House bill. And I'm just going to pause. Thanks for being here. You want to introduce yourself? And we're saying our name and something we're curious about.
My name is Jim Behrens, Community Coalition Empire. I'm interested in getting this resolved too. It should be fairly quick today, I think.
It's amazing. You were both online and in here in person.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah. Before we jump into this, I do want to read a letter of resignation from Harper Thompson. Chairs Kilmer, Farmer, Stevens, and the City of Coos Bay Ad Hoc Livability Committee. Dear chairs, members, and city staff, I'm writing to formally tender my resignation from my position on the City of Coos Bay Ad Hoc Livability Committee effective Thursday, September 19th. Serving on this committee has been an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to our community. However, I must express my concerns that more divisive action is needed to address the challenges our community faces. I sincerely hope that the committee will prioritize meaningful improvements in the future rather than focusing on and supporting decisions such as stripping business licenses that could hinder the services and support our county so desperately needs. Sincerely, Harper Thompson. So, okay, moving into the discussion item, I'm going to pass it over to Nicole to provide a little background and get us moving on some action.
So a little bit of background, this has come before this committee, an opportunity to review the city's camping ordinance following some changes to the state, which allowed, as just an example, a potential change in the number of units that are allowed to be on a property as far as living units, tents, campers, RVs, whatever that might look like. So that was the initial kind of thought here. And then while we have this ordinance open, we recognize city ordinances are living documents. It gives us opportunity to look at the rest of the ordinance if there's some things we want to maybe modify or clarify in there. And I do think that's what has occurred. Everyone has provided some feedback. We just need to hone it down and come up with what it is we believe as this body we want to recommend up to council for, if anything. It could stay as it is if that's where we land as well. So.
Great, thanks, Nicole. So you can see if you have the document in front of you, or some of you have laptops in front of you where you can look at the ordinance with the comments. The whole document is about how many pages? 10. So we can go about this two ways. We could go through it page by page and talk about the comments, or we can talk about anything that's like hot button for any of us that we want to dig into more. I mean, semantics are important, but semantics can also take us into the weeds and prevent us from moving to action. So let's just be aware of that. So, any feelings one way or another about how we want to tackle this today?
I think the definitions can probably fly as they are. I'd like them a little better. I think the overall concern when we were meeting earlier was the density of individuals that would be occupying these sites, which are a low threshold site with minimal supervision. And I was trying to figure out 2.4 or 2.4 is the average household occupancy, I think, in the city of Coos Bay. That put 19 people in 4 campsites. And I think 19 is a little bit closer to overkill. I don't think the sites are as a significant number as the number of people. So I'm going to ask Officer Coleman, what's the largest family that you've dealt with that have been displaced?
Generally, we have 1 to 2 people in a campsite. I have had some where there's been a family where there's been a young child involved in there. So at the most, I've had 3 in a campsite as far as a family goes. Okay, so the campsites that I've cleaned up in the past, several of them have had 3 and 4 as a family unit. I'm kind of thinking that 4 sites not to exceed 10 would be more reasonable. You still get your sites, so you have your one-on-one people, but not to exceed 10 overall. And as a low threshold for entry, anything over 4, I would prefer 3, but anything over 4 is land use. It's major. It's an impact, and it needs to have the surrounding neighborhood's input. All right. It wasn't that Pastor Don ran a bad show when he was up on the hill. It was the fact that the neighbors couldn't handle it.
That was when we had a large church campground going. As the neighbors were the ones that were being impacted, and they weren't gonna tolerate a lot of things that were happening through no fault of Pastor Don. All right.
Can I hit on another side of that? Not that I
Scott,
disagree.
is your microphone on? Sorry.
It is.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. On the other side of that, sometimes two might be too much for a small spot. I think the middle ground might be just to look at them case by case, because we have to register anyways. I mean, that one's already in there. Nobody's disagreeing with that. I mean, using that 3 to 4, we can decide on that today. But talking about a quick case study, and I don't want to put more on the city, don't get me wrong on that. But if I've got a driveway and I'm going to decide I'm putting 3 tenths on that driveway, it doesn't work. And if I've got a 2-acre lot and I'm going to try to put only 4 on there, that doesn't always work too. So writing a little bit of ability to variance either way. And sometimes I think we're barking up the road because nobody's really putting any on there right now, but we keep dreaming they're going to do it. Build it right. Maybe we'll get more people to be involved. So just looking at both sides of that. Too many, too little, too much space, too little space.
And I guess I can't disagree with you. And this is just having served on the planning commission down in Bandon and chaired it for 10 years. The difficulty sometimes when you put a quantitative number out like is being suggested is it might not, as you say, really be applicable to that site. But as a planning commission, we were kind of left with, well, that's what the ordinance says. And end result is we had to live with that, even though there were some occasions where we were sitting there saying, well, you know, that really doesn't make sense for this particular location. So I know you don't want to be totally subjective. Yeah, that puts the folks who have to implement this in a bind as well. But flip side of the coin is not all these sites are the same, and many are far, far different. And it's a question of, do we put a standard out there that applies to all of them, even as you say, where it might accommodate more? It's more a question of, in my mind, do they have the services there as opposed to the number?
I think this is potentially one of the challenges with ordinances is many of the things that you all have brought up is the city doesn't have the capacity to go out and like register every single camp. Right? And so we have to create an ordinance that works in most situations. And you know, these instances of, well, what if there's 2 acres, or what ifs are really difficult when we're trying to create an ordinance. And you know, to your question, Laura, who is this for, right? Like we really want to create something that works for people experiencing homelessness, for churches that want to support people experiencing homelessness, for those agencies that want to do that, but then also creating livable neighborhoods for individuals and people. And so that is what makes this tricky.
Can I throw an example out? We had to register as a spot that has sites. We registered one spot that has enough area for 2 little tiny shelters, the pallet shelters. But then we have another property connected to it that could probably hold 10. And now if I did 10, which I probably could, do you want to know what my neighbors would do? We can guess, right? So I think, and I'm saying we should get those quantitative clear numbers, just leave some sort of little line to be approved, to be whatever it may be, to give that variance and look and saying, you're not putting 2 pallet shelters in the middle of your driveway because you only have a 40 by 80 lot. And it's so just having that, just some little tiny.
Are you
line.
asking for some gray, Scott?
I'm looking for some, not that I would ever play in a gray area.
called variants, and those do exist in
Yeah.
a very formal term throughout code. So, yeah, I do think we're trying to find a solution that fits most circumstances. And it does sound like you want to have a little bit of staff capacity to vary from that. So maybe that's where we land with this. Maybe it's 3 with a potential upon a variance for greater than. Maybe it's 3 with a potential for less than, based on the circumstance.
Do you have a suggestion for wording, Nicole?
In this very moment, I don't, but I think if we get to that consensus, the team that's here at the city who have been working on this language, we could certainly come up with that, and that could be what we present to council.
How does that sound to folks?
I was just thinking like, it's hard to put numbers to anything, and I think we've heard stories of it depends on how many different groups you have, and as humans, we tend to do better when we're in smaller groups because we just function a little bit more cleanly. And so as long as there's some language that we can create that is like, maybe it's a 2 to 3, depending on variety of factors, or that's part of the plan when nonprofits apply to have these sites, right? I'm sure it already is, because this is not my wheelhouse at all, but like, what are some of the guidelines we put in that help us decide when it's no longer a good fit? Right? Like, I'm sure that exists, I'm just not aware. So I guess that's all I'll say.
Jim, you're pretty good with words. Any suggestions?
The only thing is finding the balance, and the other thing is the document's pretty fluid, it can be rewritten. So I think we do need to, pick one and go,
Mhm.
so.
I wanted to ask an unrelated question to the numbers piece, because I think I understand that the assignment was figure out the numbers piece. And there's lots of comments on other pieces of this document. So like the terms, like, are we going to move forward with, oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for? This document there as is, or are there pieces within here that we need to discuss that people suggested, like defining caseworker, defining site house? Like, I couldn't tell if that was new language or if that was added because it was in red.
Can you speak to that, Nicole?
So I'm not sure your version thereof, but anytime there is a coloration, that should be new language. So that red is new offered language by members of this body. I didn't print mine in color, so.
Saving city resources.
Yeah, and also steps, because I have a black and white printer right underneath my desk versus down the hall, but. So red new could also mean if there's, strike through where that was an opportunity, maybe remove a section or something like that. I do think there are some valid points in here. So while we're focusing on that number thing, I do think some of these others might warrant a discussion a little bit. I don't know that we need to maybe go step by step because, again, we have an hour, but I think if there's another piece here beyond the numbers that you're interested in, I think that's fair for us to talk about it. Yeah.
I'd love to kind of jump in there. Some great valid points were made in there, some great suggestion. I was a little bit worried about, man, are we going to legislate this and then this? And I thought to myself, if you put out a best practice 1 page when they get their little thing, go here, this is what you should do. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking 3 phone numbers. There's a bunch of little things. And I'm like, not a bad idea. But it could be as simple as give them a 1-pager, hand it out. Let's not legislate this. A quarterly report. I'm like, man, don't make me do another quarterly report. And you don't want to read my quarterly report. Let's be honest. He can write the report when there's a problem and you'll know about it. So those were just my thought. Less is more sometimes, and they were all good ideas. I'm not saying they weren't, but a little 1-pager, here's the best practices.
I'm going to touch on the report. The report is selling what you're doing and funding what you're doing. And one of the things that seems to fall through the cracks across the board is the inability of organizations to clearly show that they accomplished something. And particularly churches, some churches, will bend over backwards to send money out to churches below the hierarchy to be spent on social services, and other churches and other nonprofits, when they go to write grants, they have to show that they're going to be delivering something. And that's the reporting language.
So Jim, I'm not gonna do this. This is front step talk, but NIMBY world. Most people that want to know what AYA is up to. On the other hand, I don't want it to be on what's happening in Coos County and having a similar problem as the Nancy Devereux Center. I'd say quietly and just do what we need to do. I don't want to announce it or have the city regulate to me that I have to yell at everybody. This is what we're doing. It's just the NIMBY problem. So is this recorded? How much trouble am I getting in now?
No, I hear you. I mean, I appreciate this point, and I know it's been brought up before that, like, we can't celebrate all of a nonprofit success unless we know what it is. And sometimes there are some people that are going to create their own story based on what they see as success or maybe not, right? And so, yeah, I can see both sides of this. It is really tricky and something that I know those of us in nonprofit have the pleasure of working through all of the time. Yeah. So can we make a decision on 2.1 today, and then we will in the rest of our times together move through some of these other points so that we can close the chapter on this. And as folks have said, and I think if you follow the Coos Bay City Council, one of the things I love the most about this council is that this is a fluid document. What we put in place now is not written in gold and something that can't be changed. I think sometimes when we put these things in place, it's not until it gets into practice that we actually see where maybe we missed the mark, or maybe we need to refine some more. And so I think there's a lot of things in this city that this Livability Committee can tackle, and this has been a really great accomplishment. So let's set that goal today that we'll get through this document, make a decision on 2.1, read through some of these other pieces, and then maybe save a little bit of time at the end to talk about what we want to do, what we want to tackle next. So
Can I add
Yes,
just
please.
one little caveat to that, and speaking kind of to what Scott was talking about, we can certainly divide this up in what we want to be in code. So what we're going to enforce code, and what a policy might look like that we would share with the people who would apply. And so when we're looking at this, maybe we make that decision, this goes down that pathway and this goes down that pathway. And we can work on writing what that one pager looks like, which doesn't need to be in this
great,
code.
love that.
Okay.
Love that. Okay, so 2.1. Jim, you suggested 4. Does anyone have a different suggestion? Laura?
Trying to make space for other people to talk because I still feel like I'm out of my fishbowl right now. So what we're asking about is the number of campsites, right? Like that language. I really liked the finding the words to say, giving some variance. So like the 3 with some variance is where I'm at.
I was also very comfortable. It made me feel a lot better that there could be variance. That 3, I haven't heard a lot of turmoil over 3, but it gives opportunity for more if there is more capacity. So I'm really comfortable with having some language for variance.
So just quickly, and by no means with great clarity, did I write down up to 3 units as appropriate with services, with variance approved by, and then I wanted to, are we going to elevate that to a department head level decision for a variance, which is pretty typical? We could bring it back down to a more staff level if we would like, but
What makes the most sense for the resources that the city has available?
I think in this instance, department head level seems appropriate because it is a a challenge, balance of community, balance of service provider there. So bringing it up to somebody who's going to be comfortable with that responsibility.
Yep.
Seems fair.
I think most of you know I'm in the nonprofit world, so we love different ways of doing meetings. So I'm gonna use the thumbs up, middle thumbs down for an agreement on this language. So if you can let me know how you're feeling about what Nicole has proposed, thumbs up, you still want to workshop it some more, or thumbs down, you hate it. Go.
Am I
Look at
hearing,
that.
am I hearing
Consensus.
3, not 4, correct?
3.
I can live with either one for that matter.
Okay, but 3 with opportunity for variance, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, we're through 2.1. Good job, team. Okay, let's start on page 1. Well, it's actually page 3 of my packet, but at the top of the camping regulations, we're on definitions. I can see here at the top, someone deleted, there's a semantics there. Anything we want to talk about either number 6, family, 18, 19, or 20, which are street, caseworker, site host manager. Laura?
I'm always gonna have words about family, just because queer families come in all shapes and sizes, and so part of me is like, why is it limited to 2? It's pretty monogamous, heteronormative. Just curious if it matters.
Does it help that it says 2 or more persons?
Oh, good Lord. Yes, it does.
Okay.
The relation piece, I'm like, not all of us are related, we have chosen family. And so that's a piece that I think I'd love to find a way to include, because it's not necessarily legal relationships that create family, as we all know. So creating space for that, I think, is valid and fairly easy.
So it says, I'm just gonna read it. Family means 2 or more persons related by blood, marriage, adoption, legal guardianship, or other duly authorized custodial relationship. So there would maybe be one additional thing that
Yeah,
you
or
would
we
wanna
just change
suggest there.
or not more than 2 unrelated adults, because I think that's the part where I was getting stuck.
And then I guess the other kind of piece here is like, okay, we've had this stance that this is what this means. Are we now asking city staff to be asking for documentation to proof out that you are one of these things? That was my concern. We don't have maybe enforcement capacity for this piece here.
Yeah, and I always enjoy your input. When I read families from a youth perspective, I'm like, who's got, and it says custodial, right? So that just talked me to another completely different situation. We're not talking about the 2 people, we're talking about who has legal rights over a youth. And that's the way I saw it until you said something. So. Muddy the water, sorry, guys.
No, it's a really good one, because you can see family is listed throughout the document in many places. And so a definition here is probably really important. Do you have a suggested change, Laura?
No. Like, I'm trying to workshop in my head, like, is the idea of this to talk about like the folks who arrive as a group? Like you are in one housing, so I don't know,
When I-
cohabitating cohorts.
When I read that, couples are one thing. It doesn't say couples or anything, and you can choose whatever way that goes. It says family, and in my mind, it was dealing with underage youth. So that just changed everything to me. I'm like, yeah, we probably should have something in there that really says it, because the law on the other side is you can say 13 days with somebody as an unaccompanied minor before it's illegal. And I'll tell you, I just dealt with the case yesterday, underage minor sleeping in a homeless camp with somebody they should not be. So that word family to me, it just became really, really strong of being able to allow the police to do their job. Because otherwise, if we get too loose on that, it's like, well, I haven't been here 13 days yet, or I'm going to move to the next camp down, and I haven't been here 13 days yet, and he can't do his job to get that youth out of there. And it just becomes a legal nightmare for a youth. So different perspective.
Can we get some feedback from those who might be challenged with enforcing?
as far as the youth in the camps, or
I think all of this, yeah.
my experience is I can say I've come into contact with probably less than 20 youths in a camp that I'm dealing with out there. Generally, it's you're gonna have a boyfriend and girlfriend, or you'll have the occasional 3 guys that are sharing one tent. So we're not seeing a lot of the families we come into contact with. Like I said, I've had less than probably 20 children I've come into contact that were actually a family unit somewhere homeless. They generally get into resources a lot faster, so they're not necessarily living in the tents that we're contacting. I know AYA, you guys do a lot when we have families, you guys scoop them up and kind of go with them. So I don't have a lot of experience with contacting children out there as far as what we're seeing.
What about just generally the idea of a definition of family that you would then have to enforce if it was throughout this code section? Like, what kind of complication is that?
I think we get into, there would probably be some, this day and age, people would say, well, you know, how can you define a family? What's the definition of a family? And they would lean on the city. And I think we'd run into some legal aspects of what right do we have to say somebody's a family or not. I think that's where we'd start running into a lot of gray area that would probably hinder us further.
What type of enforcement action? Some sort of enforcement action. Are we dealing with domestic violence situation? Well, then there's legally defined relationships which fall under a domestic violence situation. Whereas in the municipal code situation, we might have some, use the word variance on how we kind of look at that, because it just depends on kind of what realm they. I think in the municipal world, we're probably, you know, have some gray area there, whereas the other aspect.
And just as a reminder, we're talking both in camps on public spaces and camps on a designated nonprofit space. So just keeping that kind of in mind too. So maybe we're landing with family might be something, and this is totally spitballing it, but a combination of one or more individuals who identify a connection. I mean, I don't know what that word is, but
I'm sure as we like go through the document, my brain is like, well, when does family come up? When is it actually important to define it? Like, how does it function in this
agreed, we may need
document?
to expand.
And maybe that's, I feel like that's not something we need to do as a group here. Maybe we just say, who wants to go have coffee and talk about this and just like get it done.
Yeah. I mean, it's on, let's see, it's, page 3, or in the packet, page 5B, up to one family may use a residentially zoned property developed with an occupied residential dwelling with further authorization from property owner and tenants of the property. And so if you start to insert different words there, that does start to make it challenging, because I think group is even more broad and probably not what we're going for. Household doesn't seem to fit because we're talking about persons experiencing homelessness. And so this is one of those fun semantics.
I kind of like it the way it stands. I think it's sometimes, you know, why change something that's working? Or run down this muddy water. It's like, it's not too bad.
I mean, one could say the part where it says, or other duly authorized custodial relationship. Like, what does that actually?
Authorized, that's where it gives something back to him when we're talking about youth. That word authorized changes everything, because we'll have other rules and regulations when it comes to youth. Particularly when we're talking about a 19-year-old boy with a 16-year-old girl. Or vice versa.
I'm curious would it be possible to utilize the word household instead of family, or?
I think that is a great option, but it does become maybe a challenge when we're speaking to those who don't have a home. So the first part of that word maybe is contrary to their experience.
I love Google. And when I look up duly authorized person, it does imply that there's like another outside group authenticating something. And so, could we just say or other custodial relationship and take out duly authorized? Because a custodial relationship, I would think would imply like a relationship, right? Like I'm in a partnership with you and we both agreed that that is the case.
Does that cover the instance that Scott's speaking to, though, as far as children, custody of children? If you take duly authorized out,
Mhm.
does it then allow that person to hop camps in whatever that 13-day period is?
Yeah.
Because they're in custody of, but maybe not authorized.
Is that covered under the legal guardianship line?
I hope you're not asking me because I'm gonna turn and look at it. I don't know how they get away with trying to figure out all this legal things without carrying a lawyer around in your pocket. But it does get in this really weird realm, and you may not be seeing it, but it's happening more and more. I know that we have multi-generational poverty families out there that it seems like the 15 to 20-year-old kids are splitting now. And I'm sure you're seeing more of that. And during the night, they're now going out to these camps and it's been normalized. We have gotten to the point it is really normalized out there. I'm not homeless. This is the way it's been for 2 generations. So, and there's been a lot of activities with the youth that are running homeless right now, or couch surfing, which is still a form of homelessness.
Are there other rules outside of this ordinance that take care of that though?
Tons. That's why
Right.
just leaving in that thing, it gives him, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just leaving it alone kind of says authorized. What authorized means, let a lawyer figure it out.
And then that last phrase, is that another hang up for us, that not more than 2 unrelated adults?
I don't want to beat this to death. So if I think
Okay.
of something great, I'll share it, but just trying to keep us thinking in broader terms, because
Yep.
family to me, I didn't think about the custodial power piece with kids to consider. I was just thinking of wanting everyone to get counted as they want to be counted.
And living document. Living document, we can just keep that in mind.
Okay, let's come back to this in a minute for final confirmation, once we've let it set for a minute. Let's move on to any comments on caseworker, either caseworker or the site host manager piece. Has been, there are some comments here. So I'll just read out loud. Caseworker means an individual who is assigned from a government agency or nonprofit organization to provide social service navigation and one-on-one direct support to campers.
I would ask clarification of how are we putting peers? Because I think there's people who do grassroots case management for folks. And do we want to count them in here? I'm going to mess this all up. Sorry, y'all.
Laura, it's okay. That's why you're on the committee. We need
Like-
lots of different perspectives.
Yeah, to me, you had the formalized caseworkers and then you have the people who just do this. And is it important to put them in there? Because I would say it is. It puts our community members in.
Yeah. And I would almost say it's important not to put them in. And not that I'm not saying what you're saying. There are some great people on these streets doing some great things, but all of a sudden they use this tagline, well, I'm officially this or that. And it sounds so much different. And it's like, no, you're just an advocate that is going over the line and has no professional. So that's a really, I'm looking at everyone and I know a picture they have in their head right now. So God, all these are so muddy. Can we just like move this to like Cafe 101 and just sit down for a few hours?
I mean, I would tend to agree with Scott on that. I think that by, especially when we're talking about like language for this, we're assuming that a government agency or nonprofit organization is has created like an employee handbook and as people going out with specific intentions, and not to say that community advocates don't, but we know that sometimes they don't. We've seen that, and that can be dangerous.
And then I guess I would ask, are these two words used in here? Or are we just identifying something we want to know something about? Because I just looked quick and I don't see caseworker referenced anywhere.
The first thing I did was do a search on the document and it's not in there anywhere.
So we don't need to define it.
Cool, good point. Love it. What about site host manager? Is that in there, Stacy?
Not that I can see.
Okay, let's strike it. Great. Okay, moving on to page 3 of the ordinance, page 5 of the packet. Using a single motor vehicle parked in the paved driveway of the dwelling. I see paved was added.
Okay, Sarah, the only place that on-site hosting pops up on there is in the new language at the very end. That was for camping for 4 or more sites. But we had decided on 3. And so I don't know that the rest of that is required.
Great. Awesome. Okay, any other comments on that? Okay. Paved. B.2. We've got 80 miles of unpaved streets and driveways. Is that what it is? 11. It feels like 80.
I guess it depends on what your regular driving route is. Yeah, I don't know how that got added. I don't know who, if anybody added that, if you want to speak to why paved versus non-paved is of value to add.
Oh, is that just so I can do a little announcement here? I gladly put in sidewalks for that everybody has sidewalks for whatever I'm developing for my homeless people.
Heard.
Is the city gonna put in roads? We're stuck with 11 miles and we all would love to have roads and everything everywhere, but we also understand that the city does not have the means for it. So this is the living document that we're talking about. How do we actually look at what we've got, what we're dealing with, and give that variance to make things actually work now, rather than stopping things from being able to work differently?
So then I would, based on that, what I'm hearing you say is that we strike that, because to your earlier point, less is sometimes more.
Correct.
Is everyone okay with that? Okay. Moving to 2, again, page 3 of the ordinance, page 5 of the document or of the packet, in point C, provide a storage area for campers to store any personal items so the items are not visible from any public street, and add a locking bike rack.
Clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, so does this mean that the bikes need to be like in the back of the yard, you know, like hidden? And if so, for what reason?
I don't read it that way. I just read that more about like supporting the individual to make sure their bike doesn't get stolen, but other thoughts on how they interpret that?
For me, when I read it, it is so that there is not a giant eyesore of storage stuff that's in public view. I don't think of a bike rack as, but in being combined with C on that, it does lump it all into one thing. But I think that the idea of a locking bike rack was safety of a bicycle, not to keep it out of view. But I think that item C was to keep a large amount of items not in public view.
So my neighbors in my backyard. I see where it was going. No big eyesores on the front lawn. We don't want bicycles all the way around there. I know my site, the youth come and go on their bicycles. They're unlocked. They're just sitting back there. They're leaned up to their little pallet shelter. Same thing, Cold Lake Village. It's a small community. Again, I think less is more.
Yeah,
Strike the
agree.
whole thing. Let's not
This-
even go in that direction.
It feels like we're adding a complication that would reduce the number of individuals who might offer up a space.
You feel good about that? Okay. B, it looks like we added some language, require a tent or camping shelter in a residential backyard to be not less than 10 feet away from any property line and must meet the requirements for campsite separation away from all existing structures on site to be compliant with fire code.
Well, I'll be out of compliance.
Thanks for the declaration. We'll see you later. What I had concern about this and unfortunately I don't know this, but I think we have property line setbacks and then we've gone and said, we want people to build out as much as they can to build. So is this going to now be contrary to another piece of code that says we've increased our lot setbacks or decreased them, whichever way that means, to allow you to build more out on your lot? The fire code piece does make a little bit of sense to make sure that those in the home have some safety of,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
But the 10 feet of, I don't know. if we should-
So I'm gonna say I believe less is more again. And the reason being, particularly in Empire has roads in there that have never been improved, but are still in the planning department saying they're roads. It was a grid that was laid out before it was even part of Coos Bay, which is causing all these problems with the planning department. And usually they'll come in and they'll say, well, we'll vacate that particular area. But then comes this problem that those roads were put in there because of utilities and they're scattered all over the place. You and your neighbor are sharing this little 10-foot section that then has this 10-foot variance. And it's, yeah, I don't want to talk about this rabbit hole I've gone down either. So just, in my opinion, more is less. Let's look at it case by case. If it is a problem, it can be addressed case by case.
So is this a piece of that one pager? When you bring in your application, we're gonna review these elements and that's a decision that's made at the staff level. It's part of that one pager kind of thing. Jem, you're quiet. Contemplatively quiet.
So it sounds like the options are either to strike fully or to say, or to take some of the language out to say require a tent or camping shelter in a residential backyard to meet the requirements for campsite separation away from all existing structures on site to be compliant with fire code. So option 1 is to strike it completely. Option 2 is to reduce the language. Option or 3 is I don't like either of these things. Ready, go. Okay, so, Nicole, can I ask that the city look at this one?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And city by staff?
Yes.
Yeah. Just wondering if you want to come to your table.
No, thanks. Okay, number 7. Recreational vehicles shall be 10 feet or more from any property line and parked on a paved surface. Strike? Is that what you're saying, Laura? Yeah, strike based on what we were talking about earlier, less is more.
Yeah, driveways aren't 10 feet away from the property. You can't put it in your driveway without that becoming a planning board issue problem.
Well, I think it reads 10 now, right?
Yeah, it
That's what
does.
it
Yeah,
reads.
the
currently.
addition is
You're-
and parked on a paved surface. Page 6 of the pocket, page 4 of the ordinance.
Say strike.
Yeah.
I personally have had this experience with someone in my neighborhood and they, in this instance, parked their very large RV on their grass. And it was also not 10 feet away from their home and it created a lot of issues. And so I don't think we really want people parking vehicles on grass. I do not think that leads to a livable community. I think it looks bad.
We need to go back to that other one when we start paying.
Where we were talking about tents. Because D is talking about tents, right? Oh, yeah. It's interesting you say that, Nicole, because using a single motor vehicle parked in the paved driveway of the dwelling, we talked about striking paved and I was not necessarily thinking grass or not. I was more thinking about that the driveway wouldn't be paved, but that because we left in driveway. So that would mean not on grass in my interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, are there, you wanna wear the grass driveway?
No rules, just right. Oversimplification.
Brian, I feel like something's coming to you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to think of like some way to articulate like a developed driveway, you know, because there are surfaces that are porous, you know, with grass growing between them, but they are meant for vehicles to be parked upon. So just an area that's like developed for that specific purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that too.
Is this coming from the perspective of like, sorry, here I am again. Like to me, parking stuff on the grass feels like a very like cultural value. And I'm like, why does it matter? Like, is this about the safety? Like, are we worried about fire safety and having things parked? Cause I can get behind stuff that's focusing on that. But I'm having some feelings about it otherwise.
So
I would say, yeah, I mean, I will own that. I do think that that is like probably something that I value is using things for the purpose that they're intended for and having vehicles parked on grass does like make me feel a certain way. Yeah, I'll own that. Yeah.
I have concerns about leakage and groundwater, because driveways, when they're put in, are required to be at a certain slope that they drain specific.
It's still stormwater. You know, it's like the grass is actually.
I mean, it's good, but that's where my brain goes to.
I feel in this one, if we get that, we get that wording and then do the variance. Sorry, Joe. Because if you have a double lot and you actually have a spot that was there, but it happens to be, it's not a problem. But if, on the other hand, to speak to your thing, if you're butting up against your neighbor who cannot open their door anymore. So maybe by putting it in there, but allowing that variance, if the case seems to make sense. But I want to hear what Joe has to say.
You gotta speak loud because I know you can't get up to the microphone.
Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking there's gonna be a legal precedent for all of these things. The last three items, if it has to do with fire safety, the fire department is gonna make that determination. There's nothing the city can be, they're gonna be help on that. With the parking on the grass, things like that, that's a department of environmental quality issue also. So a lot of these things we can put language in there, but ultimately we have no control. It's an EQ issue if there's a litter on park and it's leaking gasoline. Or leaking radiator fluid or leaking sewage. There's an issue that 10 feet from fire, 10 feet from the house. I'm absolutely sure that all will be in place for the fire department, fire marshal will have stuff like that. So I think a lot of this stuff we can make language, but at the end of the day.
There's bigger rules that supersede some of these things. Yeah. Yeah.
But super is any less. More with that, like come down to maybe on-site evaluation of it is get to exceeded by 100 watt.
So can we agree that, so ordinance on page 3 and page 4 of the ordinance, page 5 and 6 of the packet, that, the things where it's talking about vehicles shall be 10 feet or the tent should be a certain number of feet, that maybe lands in the one pager? Because that would be more comprehensive of things outside of this ordinance that are related to fire codes and environmental codes and things like that. Does that seem, it's a good suggestion? Yeah. Okay, great. On page 4, going down to letter D, a 24-inch by 24-inch sign visible from the street must be posted and has 3 contact phone numbers report issues and concerns with individuals listed, available to respond to the site within 30 minutes. And the non-emergency Coos Bay Police Department number. This contact list shall be in file with the City Community Development Department and updated quarterly.
For me, that opens harassment to those individuals with their phone numbers listed. Because anybody that just is not happy, then not in my backyard, is going to just spam call the phone numbers that are listed openly for, and harass those individuals.
So would you suggest we strike it altogether?
I think we have it covered with the registration and the phone number that's on there. And yeah, I think less is more.
How does the Coos Bay Police Department feel about that?
I'd have to push that up to change the chief there, I think, and I know having at least emergency contact numbers in our, if it's on registration, that's being key for us. We do that with alarm permits, we do that with all, we just need to be able to contact somebody that can oversee that is within. Big thing to see is people put numbers, but they don't answer the phones.
Right.
And then we're stuck at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to figure something out, with something more.
So maybe it's more that there's 3 contact phone numbers with the registration.
Yeah, and that's, we do that with our property permits, we have at least 2 numbers on it, we can contact somebody.
So this could be moved out of legislative into the registration process. Yeah.
Does everyone feel good about that? Okay. Faith-based and nonprofit organizations, site operators shall report quarterly to the Community Development Department the number of individuals using the site. And their disposition category: rehoused, interdrug mental health treatment, deceased, relocated out of the area, dropped from program, or no progress and still on site. The site operator will also provide the length of time the site user has lived in Coos County in the past 5 years.
All I hear is FTE.
Right, like this might just be a barrier.
It's a barrier, yeah.
Mhm. Other thoughts on this? I mean, I think I would assume that this is potentially about wanting just some data about how this maybe helps improve lives. But then also some accountability, yeah.
So we just had a point in time count this winter, and I haven't heard any results publicly announced. I think that this is just me. We have a shadow issue. It doesn't get the numbers publicized, and when it is publicized, they're so dated that they're worthless. And this is a method to wave in front of Dick Anderson and Boomer Wright. We got this many people and we need a piece of the pie to deal with this. And someone has to keep some reasonable stats. I'll give you my one that torques me is there's a rule now that if you're homeless and die in the woods, that you're tracked separately. But when I go to look for that, we're lumped with several other counties. So I have no idea how many homeless people have died in the woods in Coos County. And I think if you were able to beat the drum, so to speak, because you had the numbers, it would make a difference. I do believe down the road it's worth keeping some stats.
Is that a registration piece, which requires some sort of update versus a legislative here piece?
And I was going to add in, for me, that feels like something that would be fantastic for a nonprofit to take up, kind of the collection of that data, but not the city's responsibility.
Okay,
So maybe our
So
registration
strike
includes
and move to registration.
and it includes a connection with a service provider of some sort so that there is some accounting.
Just to clarify, when we're saying putting it in the best, this is like the best practices piece, right? Like in my head, I'm like, this is basically a grant report. You're asking people to do a grant report. And I feel like any nonprofit who's doing that is already doing that. So asking them to do it again.
This is just in the landowner section, so be mindful of someone who maybe is just
Just a
going to
private
open
landowner.
up their property. Now has this level of
Yeah.
reporting
Yeah.
versus maybe connecting them to a service provider who can do
Because
that.
yeah, service
wraparound.
providers doing it. Okay, cool. I had lots of feels about this one too, so.
Yeah.
It is 1 o'clock. This was a really fast and furious way to get us to action. I don't think we are 100% there, and that's okay because we want to all feel good about this. And so family, I think, is still hanging out there, right? Some language from the city about the variance. And I have some notes I'll send to you. And then also some ideas about what the one pager could look like in the registration. And so I'm gonna suggest that we table and come back at our next meeting and really finalize this, like last and final, not final, like final for now, right? Knowing this is fluid. And that we spend the next first part of that meeting finalizing this, so we feel really good about that document. So that would be October's meeting. And that then we really carve out at least 15 minutes of that next meeting to talk about what we'd like to take up next as the committee, because so invite you all to come with what those ideas are. I know I've talked with some of you about what that could be, and I think that this committee could really be influential to influence some really cool livability aspects of the community. So that's exciting, so that we know that's coming in October. So thank you all today. I know there was still some comments that we didn't get from the audience, so please feel free to send those our way as we're continuing to refine this. And if you have thoughts on some of those things that are still out there, send them to Nicole or I, and we will get them in there so we can feel good about this document at the end of our meeting next month. Thank you. See you soon.